What if some of the strangest shows in television history were not just forgotten, but erased for a reason? These were not quiet cancellations. These were ideas that collapsed under their own weight. From billion-dollar ambitions to concepts that vanished overnight, this list dives into the shows that tried to change television and failed spectacularly. And the deeper you go, the more unbelievable these failures become. Number 15. Hello, Larry, 1979. It should have been a safe bet. A familiar face, a built-in audience, a smooth transition from one beloved show into another. That was the promise behind Hello, Larry. When McLean Stevenson walked away from the massive success of MASH, the expectation was simple. He would carry that charm into a new hit. Or instead, he stepped into one of the most quietly brutal misfires of the decade. The premise felt harmless. A radio host moves to a small town with his daughters and tries to rebuild his life. On paper, it had warmth. It had relatability. But on screen, something never connected. The humor felt forced. The emotional beats felt recycled. And the comparisons to his previous role never stopped haunting the show. Audiences did not see a new character. They saw someone trying to escape a shadow that refused to let go. What made the failure more fascinating was not just the ratings. It was the expectation gap. This was not a risky experiment. This was supposed to work. NBC even tried to boost it by tying it into different strokes. That move only made things worse. It exposed how disconnected the show really was from the audience it wanted. By the time it ended, Hello, Larry had become a cautionary tale. Not about bad ideas, but about timing. About leaving success too early, and about how television can turn confidence into regret, almost overnight. Number 14. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer, 1998. Before it even aired, the damage had already begun. The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer didn't just enter television. It walked straight into controversy. The premise alone was enough to trigger outrage. A sitcom set during the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, told through the perspective of a British servant navigating life inside the White House. On paper, it aimed for satire. On screen, it felt like something else entirely. The show attempted to blend historical setting with broad comedy. I'm inserting modern humor into one of the most sensitive periods in American history. References to slavery, race, and politics were treated with a tone that many found deeply inappropriate. What was intended as edgy quickly became uncomfortable. The reaction was immediate and organized. Protests formed before the premiere. Civil rights groups publicly condemned the show. Pressure mounted on the network to cancel it before it even had a chance to find an audience. And when it finally aired, that pressure only intensified. Viewers didn't debate it. They rejected it. Ratings were weak, but the real issue was backlash. Affiliates began pulling away. The controversy overshadowed everything else. There was no space for the show to evolve, no opportunity to adjust. It was already defined by the reaction against it. Within a handful of episodes, it was gone. What makes this failure so striking is not just how fast it ended, but how inevitable it felt. This wasn't a slow miscalculation. It was a concept that collided with its audience the moment it appeared. Because in television, pushing boundaries can create impact. But pushing the wrong boundaries can end everything before it even begins. Number 13, Supertrain, 1979. There are failures. And then there are disasters so large they become legends. Supertrain was not just another canceled show. It was a high-risk gamble that collapsed in full view of the entire industry. NBC believed they were building the future of television. What they actually built was one of the most expensive flops ever made. The idea sounded ambitious. A nuclear-powered luxury train traveling across America. Each episode would feature different passengers, different stories, a moving world filled with drama and spectacle. It was pitched as television's answer to blockbuster cinema. Massive sets were constructed. Budgets soared beyond anything seen before on the small screen. But something went wrong the moment it aired. The spectacle could not hide the emptiness underneath. The writing felt thin. The characters felt disposable. Viewers did not care about the train because they did not care about the people inside it. And without emotional connection, the scale meant nothing. Ratings dropped fast. Executives panicked. The show was retooled mid-run. Formats shifted. Tone changed. None of it worked. The audience had already made its decision. The train kept moving, but no one was watching anymore. But by the time it ended, Supertrain had done more than fail. It had shaken confidence in big-budget television. It proved that money alone cannot create engagement. And in the silent aftermath, one lesson echoed through the industry. Bigger does not mean better. Number 12. Struck by Lightning. 1979. Some failures are loud. Others are so quiet they almost disappear. Struck by Lightning belongs to the second kind. It arrived without much noise and left even faster. Yet its collapse reveals how fragile sitcom formulas had become by the end of the decade. The premise followed a sarcastic high school teacher navigating students and school politics. On paper, it had potential. The classroom setting had worked before. Authority figures clashing with youth had always created tension. But this time something felt off from the start. The tone was uneven. The humor lacked bite. And the characters never evolved beyond simple sketches. What made the situation worse was timing. Audiences had already seen stronger versions of similar ideas. They expected sharper writing, stronger personalities. Instead, they were given something that felt dated the moment it appeared. Television had moved forward. This show had not. NBC gave it a chance, but the numbers told a clear story. Viewers were not invested. Episodes came and went without impact. There was no word of mouth, no growing curiosity, just silence. And silence on television is dangerous. It means indifference, not outrage, not debate, just absence of interest. That is what ultimately sealed the fate of Struck by Lightning. It did not fail dramatically, or it simply failed to matter. In a decade full of bold risks, this show reminds us of something equally important. Playing it safe can be just as deadly, because in a crowded landscape, being forgettable is the fastest way to disappear. Number 11. Pink Lady and Jeff, 1980. It looked like a global event. It felt like a guaranteed success, and it collapsed almost instantly. Pink Lady and Jeff was built on international fame, a wildly popular Japanese pop duo paired with an American comedian. The goal was clear: merge two cultures, capture two audiences, and create something massive. Instead, it created confusion. The structure never settled. Language barriers became visible. Timing felt off. Jokes missed their rhythm. The hosts themselves seemed disconnected from the material, reading lines they barely understood. Onto what should have felt energetic instead felt awkward. And then came the deeper issue: identity. The show didn't know who it was for. American audiences didn't recognize the pop duo. Japanese fans didn't connect with the format. It existed between worlds without belonging to either. Viewers tuned in out of curiosity. They didn't stay out of interest. Behind the scenes, reports described tension, miscommunication, and a production struggling to hold itself together. On screen, that instability became impossible to hide. Ratings collapsed. Critics were brutal. And within weeks, the show was gone. What remains is not just a failure, but a rare example of ambition misfiring on a global scale. Because sometimes combining two successes doesn't create something bigger. Sometimes it creates something that doesn't work anywhere at all. Number 10. My Mother the Car, 1965. Some ideas sound strange, others sound impossible. My Mother the Car crossed that line and never came back. The premise is almost surreal. A man discovers that his deceased mother has been reincarnated as a car. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. And the car talks. Even for the mid-60s, this felt like a risk, but the show committed fully to its concept, building entire storylines around conversations between a man and a vehicle that claimed to be his mother. At first, curiosity drove attention. People tuned in just to understand how something like this could exist, but curiosity quickly turned into disbelief. The problem wasn't just the absurdity. It was sustainability. Once the shock of the premise faded, there was nowhere for the story to go. Episodes repeated the same central idea without evolution. The novelty wore off faster than expected. Critics didn't hold back. Many called it one of the worst concepts ever brought to television. Audiences didn't argue. They simply stopped watching. And yet, that's what makes it unforgettable. Because My Mother the Car represents a unique kind of failure. Not one built on poor execution alone, but on a concept so unusual that it struggled to exist beyond its own premise. It didn't just fail. It became a symbol of how far television can go and what happens when it goes too far. Number 9, Heel Honey, I'm Home, 1990. It sounds like a joke. It should have never been real, but it aired. Heil Honey, I'm Home attempted something almost unthinkable. A traditional sitcom centered around Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, and portrayed as a bickering suburban couple. The structure followed familiar patterns: laugh track, domestic arguments, neighbor interactions. It looked like every other sitcom of its time. But the subject matter changed everything. What was meant to be satire instead felt deeply uncomfortable. The tone clashed with the history behind the characters. The humor never found balance, and the audience reaction was immediate and intense. This was not slow rejection. This was instant backlash. The show was pulled after just one episode, not one season, not 1 week. One episode. What makes this failure so extreme is not just its brevity, but its miscalculation. It misunderstood the line between bold and unacceptable, between satire and insensitivity. And once that line was crossed, there was no recovery. In television history, yet very few shows disappear this quickly. Fewer still leave behind such a powerful lesson, because some ideas don't fail over time. They fail the moment they exist. Number 8, Cop Rock, 1990. It was supposed to reinvent television, a police drama, where characters suddenly break into song. Cop Rock came from a respected creator with a proven track record. That alone gave it credibility. But what followed became one of the strangest experiments ever broadcast. The concept blended two genres that rarely meet: gritty crime storytelling and full musical performance. Interrogations turned into ballads. Arrests became choreographed numbers. Emotional breakdowns unfolded through lyrics instead of dialogue. On paper, it was bold. On screen, it was disorienting. The tonal clash proved impossible to ignore. The serious themes collided with theatrical delivery. Scenes that should have felt intense became unintentionally surreal. Viewers didn't know how to react. So many chose not to. Critics were divided but loud. Some admired the risk. Most questioned the execution. Audiences, however, made the final decision. Ratings dropped fast. Despite heavy promotion and high expectations, the show couldn't hold attention. The experiment ended after a short run, leaving behind confusion more than admiration. And yet its failure is fascinating, because Cop Rock didn't fail from lack of ambition. It failed because ambition alone isn't enough. Innovation needs balance. It needs connection. Without that, even the most original ideas can feel completely out of place. Number 7, Kolchak the Night Stalker, 1974. It begins in darkness. A city that feels alive, yet strangely hollow. A reporter chasing stories that no one else wants to believe. Kolchak. The Night Stalker did not look like anything else on television at the time, and that difference is exactly what made its failure so unusual. At its center is a character driven by obsession. He searches for truth in places others avoid. Each episode pulls him deeper into mysteries that blur the line between reality and the unknown. It is not just a crime show. It is not just horror. It sits between genres, creating something unpredictable. For a moment, that unpredictability works. Viewers are intrigued. The atmosphere pulls them in. But sustaining that tension proves difficult. The format begins to repeat. The structure becomes familiar. And what once felt fresh starts to feel expected. Behind the scenes, there are also problems. Production demands increase. Creative disagreements surface. The strain becomes visible. And when a show built on intensity loses momentum, it struggles to recover. Ratings begin to slip. Not dramatically, but steadily. Enough for the network to take notice. Enough to question the future. Eventually, the decision is made. The show is canceled after just one season. And yet the story does not end there. Over time, Kolchak the Night Stalker finds a second life. It becomes a cult favorite. Its influence spreads into future shows. What was once considered a failure transforms into something respected. But at the moment of its cancellation, none of that mattered. In 1974, it was simply another show that could not hold its place. A reminder that sometimes television does not recognize value until it is already gone. Number 6, The Texas Wheelers, 1974. There is a certain kind of show that feels different the moment it begins. Not louder, not bigger, just slightly off rhythm compared to everything around it. The Texas Wheelers carried that feeling from the start. It was not trying to follow the usual sitcom formula. It was trying to bend it. The story centers on an unconventional family living in Texas. Their interactions feel less scripted, more unpredictable. Conversations move in unexpected directions. Humor comes from personality rather than setup. It is subtle. It is unusual. And for some viewers, it is refreshing. Critics notice this immediately. They see something distinct, something that stands apart from the standard television landscape. But critical appreciation does not always translate into audience support. And that is where the problem begins. Viewers at the time expect clarity, familiar rhythms, recognizable patterns. This show offers something looser, something harder to define. And that difference creates distance. People do not reject it outright. They simply do not connect with it strongly enough to stay. As episodes continue, the ratings reveal the truth. The audience is not growing. The momentum is not building. The show exists in a space between admiration and indifference. And in television, that space is dangerous. Eventually, the network makes its decision. The show is canceled after one season, quietly, without much resistance. It fades away almost as gently as it arrived. Well, yet looking back, the Texas Wheelers feels like a glimpse of a different direction television could have taken. A softer tone, a more natural style. But in 1974, it did not fit the moment. And when something does not fit the moment, it rarely survives. Number 5, Me and the Chimp, 1972. It begins with a premise that feels instantly chaotic. A family, a workplace, and at the center of it all, a chimpanzee with unpredictable behavior. Me and the Chimp does not hide what it is trying to do. It wants to entertain through disorder, through surprise, through the kind of comedy that relies on things going wrong at the worst possible moment. At first, that energy creates curiosity. Viewers tune in to see what will happen next. The presence of the animal adds a layer of unpredictability that traditional sitcoms cannot replicate. Every scene carries the possibility of something unexpected. And for a brief moment, that novelty works. But novelty has a limit. Once the surprise fades, the structure becomes visible. Episodes begin to follow a familiar pattern. Setup chaos, resolve, repeat. The humor starts to feel mechanical. What once seemed spontaneous now feels controlled. There is also a deeper issue beneath the surface. The human characters struggle to stand out. They react to the chimp rather than drive the story themselves. That imbalance weakens the foundation of the show. Because when the central gimmick loses impact, there is nothing strong enough to replace it. As weeks pass, the ratings begin to drop. Not dramatically, but consistently. The audience that arrived out of curiosity does not stay out of loyalty. And without loyalty, a show cannot survive. The network responds quickly. Episodes are limited. The run is shortened. And the show ends before it can evolve into something more grounded. In the end, Me and the Chimp becomes a clear example of a concept that burns bright and fades fast. It proves that unpredictability can attract attention, but it cannot sustain it. Because attention is temporary. Connection is what keeps a show alive. And this show never found that connection. Number 4, The Good Guys, 1970. At first glance, it seems like a safe formula. Two friends, a simple setting, everyday problems turned into light comedy. The Good Guys appears to follow a path that had already worked many times before. And that familiarity is exactly what makes its failure so revealing. The show stars Bob Denver, a face audiences already recognize and trust. That recognition creates expectation. Viewers assume they know what they are going to get. Comfort, humor, consistency. But familiarity can quickly turn into limitation if it is not supported by strong material. As the episodes unfold, something becomes clear. The energy feels restrained. The humor feels predictable. The interactions never build into something memorable. It is not that the show is bad. It is that it never rises above average. And average is difficult to sustain in a competitive environment. Another factor quietly shapes its decline. Timing. Television audiences were beginning to look for sharper voices, more distinct identities, shows that reflected changing attitudes. The Good Guys feels rooted in an earlier style. It does not evolve with the moment. The ratings begin to reflect that disconnect. Not a sudden collapse, but a steady erosion. Each week, fewer viewers return. The show does not generate conversation. It does not create anticipation. It simply exists. Eventually, the network makes the inevitable decision. Cancellation arrives without drama, without controversy, just a quiet ending. And that is what makes this failure different. It is not remembered for being terrible. It is remembered for being forgettable. A show that followed the rules too closely, and in doing so failed to stand out. Because sometimes playing it safe is the most dangerous choice of all. Number 3. The Ugliest Girl in Town, 1970. It begins with a premise that immediately raises questions. A man disguises himself as a woman to secure a modeling job. That is the central idea of the ugliest girl in town. Even by the standards of the late 60s moving into the early 70s, it feels unusual. Not impossible, just difficult to sustain. At first, the show leans into the absurdity. The humor comes from confusion, from mistaken identity, from situations that spiral out of control. For a brief moment, this creates energy. Viewers are curious. They want to see how far the concept will go, but curiosity alone is not enough. As episodes continue, the limitations become clear. The joke does not evolve. It repeats. Each situation mirrors the last, and repetition without growth quickly leads to fatigue. The show becomes predictable in a way that drains its original charm. There is also a deeper issue in tone. The series struggles to balance satire with sincerity. It does not fully commit to either direction. As a result, the characters never feel grounded. They exist to serve the premise rather than grow beyond it. And when characters remain static, audiences lose interest. The ratings reflect this shift. What begins as mild curiosity turns into steady decline. Viewers stop returning. The momentum disappears. And without momentum, even the most unusual ideas cannot survive. Eventually, the network pulls the show. It ends quietly, leaving behind a concept that promised more than it delivered. Looking back, it feels like an experiment that never found its purpose. Because in television, a bold idea is only the beginning. What matters is how that idea evolves. And when it fails to evolve, it fades just as quickly as it arrived. Number 2. The New People, 1970. Imagine being stranded. No rules, no authority. Just a group of young survivors forced to build a new society from nothing. That is the foundation of The New People. It sounds powerful. It sounds intense. And for a moment, it feels like it could become something unforgettable. The show places its characters in isolation, cut off from the world they once knew. Every decision carries weight. Every conflict has consequences. It explores leadership, survival, morality, themes that naturally create tension. But translating that tension into a weekly series proves more difficult than expected. At first, the concept draws attention. Viewers are intrigued by the possibilities. They tune in to see how this new society will evolve. But over time, the structure begins to limit the narrative. Episodes repeat similar conflicts. Power struggles rise and fall without lasting impact. The sense of progression weakens. Another challenge emerges in character development. With such a large group, it becomes difficult to focus on individual arcs. Some characters feel underdeveloped. Others fade into the background. Without strong personal connections, the larger story loses emotional weight. As weeks pass, the ratings begin to drop. The initial curiosity fades. The audience does not see enough change to stay invested. And without that investment, the show cannot sustain itself. Eventually, it is canceled after one season. A concept filled with potential that never fully translated into lasting engagement. It becomes another reminder that ambition alone is not enough, because even the strongest ideas need structure. They need evolution. And without those elements, even the most promising stories can slowly drift into silence. Number 1. Turn On, 1970. It begins without warning. No familiar setup, no comforting rhythm, just a barrage of fragmented sketches driven by machines. Turn On was not trying to be like other shows. It was trying to redefine what television could be. And in doing so, it created one of the most immediate and dramatic failures in broadcast history. The concept revolved around computers generating comedy. Not humans reacting to situations, but systems producing content. That idea alone placed the show far ahead of its time. But execution is everything. And here, execution turned innovation into confusion. Scenes appeared and vanished without transition. Characters felt incomplete. Humor arrived in bursts that never fully connected. For viewers, the experience was disorienting. There was no narrative to follow, no characters to invest in, just a constant stream of disconnected ideas. Some found it fascinating. Most found it exhausting. And television audiences rarely stay with something that demands more effort than it gives in return. The reaction was swift. Affiliates pulled the show mid-broadcast. Some stations cut the signal before the episode even finished. Phones lit up with complaints. Confusion turned into rejection almost instantly. It was not a slow decline. It was a collapse in real time. What makes Turn On so remarkable is not just how quickly it failed, but why it failed. It challenged the language of television before audiences were ready to understand that language. It asked viewers to adapt instead of guiding them through something new. And that is the risk of innovation. Move too slowly and you are forgotten. Move too fast and you are rejected. Turn On moved faster than its time could handle. And in a single night, it disappeared, leaving behind one of the most unforgettable failures the medium has ever seen. Some shows fail because they are bad. Others fail because they arrive at the wrong moment. But the most fascinating failures are the ones that dared to be different and paid the price. Which one surprised you the most? And which forgotten disaster do you think deserves another look today?